Good evening, and welcome back to our reading of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This being A Christmas Carol in Prose, being a ghost story of Christmas by Charles Dickens with 4 illustrations in color and 4 woodcuts by John Leech, a facsimile of the original edition, with an introduction by J.K. Chesterton, a preface by B.W. Matz, London, Cecil Palmer, Oakley House, Bloomsbury Street, WC1. We are starting Stave 3, Part 3 tonight, and if you have not watched the previous videos, I highly recommend going back and watching those or re-watching them to catch yourself back up. I will reread a little bit of the previous night's video to catch us up to where we were. If you are, however, not interested in any spoilers or any facts and history and opinions of the Victorian period and Charles Dickens, please skip ahead to what I have written down here, or when I pick this book back up again. So, my phone died, so now you're plugged in, and it's a little bit of a different angle, so I apologize. But anyway, when I pick this book back up again, feel free to tune in. Otherwise, stick around for the history, opinions, and factoid portion of the video. First, I have to show you how cute Arsu is, because he'd be falling asleep, and he really is just a crash raptor when he sleeps. He just crashes. No thoughts. Smooth brain. I love you. You're so cute, buddy. So Christmas traditions the world over have always been with us, right from, the medieval period. But the Victorian period itself was chock full of Victorian Christmas tradition, and it is typically actually blamed on the Victorians for the reason why it's so commercialized nowadays. Now, back in the 1800s, it was Queen Charlotte that actually introduced the first Christmas tree to the royal family. She brought it from her home in Germany. Zios has decided to join us. Now, it wasn't until later in 1840 that Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's consort, decided to bring in a Christmas tree from his home in Coburg, Germany. And it wasn't until a couple years after that that the periodicals and newspapers started to depict the royal family in drawings with a Christmas tree every year. And the Victorians thus picked up the tradition, wanting to seem closer to the royal family and closer to their ideals. It was also at this time that we received printing and depictions of Christmas cards being made, books, such as A Christmas Carol, being made and distributed widely as gifts, as well as wine and plum pudding, and other things being marketed as the Christmassy thing to do, as the good spirit and good charity thing to do. The Victorians even had very wide publications of crafting at this time. They had many books on the subject of how to create a Christmas doily, or how to create a Christmas pair of socks, or even various other things like gingerbread houses and iced cakes and mulled wine. Another popular drink at this time was hot grog, which is typically very similar to a hot toddy. Dark rum, some sort of citrus, orange, lemon, lime, some brown sugar or demerara sugar, or even just regular sugar or molasses, some cinnamon, a little bit of clove, and hot water. Mixed into a drink and drunk hot, and it is quite delicious, I have to say. Though, if you've ever had a hot toddy, it's quite similar. But it is also noted that hot glögg, a different Swedish recipe, was also drunk at this time, which is more like a mulled wine. It has port or wine, rum, brandy, and cinnamon, cardamom, clove, as well as orange zest and a bunch of other delicious things in it, such as molasses or brown sugar. Some recipes even called for blanched almonds or white almonds and dark raisins. Or, of course, hot chocolate, which was at the Victorian period seen as a woman's drink, but is counting. But it has been around from the Aztecs and the Mayans from as early as 500 BC. All of these worldly traditions building up, of course, into our reading for tonight. So just think of these traditions as we go through the next portion of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Without much further ado, Stave 3, Part 3. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty. And Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy. Grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded, and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim until the last. By this time it was getting dark and snowing pretty heavily, and as Scrooge and the spirit went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires and kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Here the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cozy dinner, with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, a deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut out cold and darkness. There all the children of the house were running out into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, and be the first to greet them. Here, again, were shadows on the window blind of guests assembling, and there a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted, and all chattering at once, tripped lightly off to some near neighbor's house, where, woe upon the single man who saw them enter, artful witches. Well, they knew it in a glow. But if you had judged them from the number of people on their way to friendly gatherings, you might have thought that no one was at home to give them welcome when they got there. Instead of every house expecting company and piling up its fires half a chimney high, blessings on it, how the ghost exulted, how it bared its breath abreast, and opened its capricious palm, and floated on, outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. The very lamplighter who ran on before, dotting the dusky street with specks of light, and who was dressed to spend the evening somewhere, laughed out loudly as the spirit passed. Though little kenned the lamplighter that he had any company but Christmas. And now, without a word of warning from the ghosts, they stood upon the bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stone were cast about, as though it were the burial place of giants, and water spread itself wheresoever it listed, or would have done so, but for the frost held it prisoner, and nothing grew but moss and furze, and coarse rank grass. Down in the west the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation for an instant, like a sullen eye, and frowning lower, lower, lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of the darkest night. "What place is this?" asked Scrooge. "A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth," returned the spirit. "But they know me. See!" A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire. An old man and woman with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling of the wind upon the barren waste, was singing them a Christmas song. It had been a very old song when he was a boy, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So surely as they raised their voices, the old man not quite blithe and loud, and so surely as they stopped, his vigor sank again. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped whither? Not to sea, to sea. To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of the land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns that had worn and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. Built on a dismal reef of sunken rocks, some league or so from shore, on which the waters chafed and dashed the wild year through, there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds, born of the wind, one might suppose, as seaweed of the water, rose and fell about it, like the waves they skimmed. But even here, 2 men who watched the light had made a fire, and through that loophole the thick stone wall shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea. Joining their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other a Merry Christmas in their can of grog, and one of them, the elder too, with his face all damaged and scarred with hard weather, as the figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like the gale in itself. Again the ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on and on, until, being far away, as he told Scrooge, from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout on the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark, ghostly figures in their several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes belonging to it. And every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had had a kinder word for the day on that day than on any day in the year, and had shared to some extent in its festivities, and had remembered those he cared for at a distance, and had known that they delighted to remember him. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while listening to the moaning of the wind, and thinking what a solemn thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness, over an unknown abyss whose depths were secrets as profound as death. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, the spirits standing smiling by his side and looking at that same nephew with approving affability. "Ha ha!" laughed Scrooge's nephew. "Ha ha ha! If you should happen, by any unlikely chance, to know a man more blessed in a laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is, I should like to know him too. Introduce him to me, and I'll cultivate his acquaintance." And that is where we stop for tonight. Stay tuned tomorrow. Thanks so much, and see you when we enter Scrooge's nephew's house.